We finally made it. In a couple hours, we are going to have real, live, meaningful football out of the NFL. Welcome into Sports Around the Bar. I, as always, am Jake, your bartender. And man, let me just say, guys, we survived another long off season together. I am so glad to be back. I'm so glad to have you guys back. It's been a long haul over here at Sports Around the Bar, just trying to struggle through the off season, watching other sports, and let me just say, there's a reason football is king. There is a reason why we love talking football 24/7 with you guys, and it is just so great that it's back. Welcome into the show, everybody. I already see I've got comments here from Will. Today, on Sports Around the Bar, we are talking NFC predictions and where we think everybody is going to finish. Bear with me a little bit. Might be a little awkward because I am trying to monitor comments as well as running everything behind the scenes and flipping everything over. As you can see, it's just me today. So be patient with me. I'll try to get through it as best as I can. As always, like, share, subscribe. Helps a lot for the show, and we appreciate each and every one of you guys who do it. It means so much to us. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get into it. We're about to go through really quick. Let's start with some comments, and then we're going to move into the NFC East and start by talking about them. Will says he's already hearing the cannons firing. I'm not going to read that second part because we're not trying to upset any Cowboys fans. Also, JP goes on to say, Bucks by 200. You're already predicting the game. I was going to save that for the end to try to keep people in suspense, but why don't we start with it just because it's coming up here in a few minutes. Yeah, it's hard to not pick the defending world champ Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You know, it's been years since we've been able to call them that, but Tampa coming off their second Super Bowl should be everybody's favorite, I would say, to win this game, especially with Zach Martin, offensive guard for the Cowboys, missing time tonight due to COVID. The Cowboys having not played a ton of football together as a cohesive unit in the preseason as well. I know the Buccaneers didn't really either too much, but it's just hard for me not to pick the Cowboys. I look at not to pick the Buccaneers. It's hard for me to pick the Cowboys because I look at this matchup, and you have 22 returning starters for Tampa Bay. You have everybody that was on that Super Bowl run returning, ready to play, in pretty good health for this game versus a Cowboys squad that had a ton of injuries last year. They didn't really get to work too much together. Coming off of that, personally, I don't think the Cowboys had a good enough offseason to beat a team like Tampa Bay in the first week. The only thing I can say the Cowboys have going for them is that Tampa's coming off the Super Bowl, and they might have a bit of a Super Bowl hangover. You know, teams tend to maybe slack off in practice. They tend to slack off in the weight room a little bit after winning the Super Bowl, and they don't come back the next year as tough as they usually do. When I look at this matchup, that might be the only saving grace, and if I'm the Cowboys, maybe playing Tampa in week one is what I want. Maybe I want to catch them before they get serious midway through the season, where maybe they've dropped a couple games and maybe they haven't started as strong as they've wanted to. So maybe you get to be that surprise upset to start. That might be one of the only blessings for the Cowboys. Outside of that, I'm excited to see Dak Prescott's return. I think him back on the field is going to be very, very interesting, as well as a lot of the offensive line members, minus Zach Martin, coming back together for the Cowboys. Should make it interesting. I think the game will stay interesting through the third quarter at least. And the reason I say that is because I think the Cowboys are going to put up some points. They might surprise Tampa early. They might hang in there, maybe be like 7, 8, 9 points down when we go to halftime. After that, I don't really see them holding on too much longer throughout the third quarter. I see the Bucs kind of pulling away, and I expect this will be a high-scoring affair, but I think the Bucs are going to win this one 41-28. I think the Cowboys are going to fall just short, and Tampa will take the first game of the season here. Moving on to a couple more of these comments here. Will says I'm being modest, okay. Chris goes on to say the Cowboys by 3. Do they have to outshoot Chris really quick? Do they have to outshoot Tampa? This could be 51-48 if they win by 3, or is there a chance that the defense is going to step up and play better than most people are expecting them to in that 3-point victory? Let me know in the comments. Ramey, good to see you as well. He says he sees me with the background. Yeah, absolutely. JP said he forgot a few zeros when he picked the Cowboys to lose by 200. Will says Bucks by 21. I could see that happening, but I think the Cowboys are going to press the Bucs a little bit more than people think. I think we forget how high-powered this offense can be. Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup. You also have the rookie whose name, or the second-year pro out of Oklahoma, whose name I'm just drawing a blank on right now. They have wide receivers to answer the Buccaneers. They have guys that are going to be able to run up the score. You also have Zeke, who's going to be running behind a fresh Cowboys offensive line that's now back and fully healthy. I don't think they're going to roll over. 28 seems like a lot to me, but then again, I don't really expect this defense for the Cowboys to do a whole lot. I think we might see Tampa run the ball more than we expect them to. I think they're going to take advantage of that kind of weak interior on the defensive line the Cowboys have, and we might see them just gash with Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones for 5-6 yards a carry. Ramey goes on to say Cowboys win 27-26. Interesting scoreline. Is it because it's the first week you think there might be a little lack of rhythm that keeps the score a little bit lower than I'm predicting? Is that what you're thinking, Ramey? Let me know in the comments as well. Will says, fire them cannons. He says, Bucs win 49-3. I don't see that. Dallas should score some points. If they don't score any points, there's going to be some questions to be had. I think that Dallas at least scores a few. Justin, good to see you, man. He says, let's go, boys. David says, wrong. Tampa Bay 38, Dallas maybe 14. 14 for this high-powered of an offense. If that's the case, man, I don't know how you don't put a bet down right now on Tampa winning the Super Bowl again, because this offense can score points. If the Buccaneers can keep them to 14, and I know they got the Chiefs, but the Chiefs basically had a dead offensive line by the Super Bowl. But if they keep a team that's this high-powered to 14 points, I'm going to put $100 down on the the Buccaneers to win the Super Bowl right now. Good to see you, Michael. As always, Will goes on to also say the Bucs defense makes Zeke look like a high school player, and their secondary will make everyone think twice. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Zeke will be the focal point here. I think really the big issue is going to be the Cowboys and slowing down their passing attack. With the way they spread the ball around between three great wide receivers, I know the Bucs secondary has come on here last year. It's just hard to keep an offense in this day and age in the NFL where you're not allowed to touch these wide receivers. It's so hard to keep a team that's that talented out of the end zone. That's why I just see them scoring some points here. I think the game stays close, but Dallas's defense is not in any shape to keep up an offense like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, love that I have people in the comments here that were picking Dallas to win. Let me know why you think that's going to happen as well. Ramey goes on to say that's what he can see happening as well. Justin says not to be confused with the Cowboys. Okay, go Pack, go, he says. All right. If anything, I don't care what the game looks like. If it's 55-3, I'm going to watch the entire thing. I'm just so happy to have meaningful football back. But let's not dwell too much on that game. Let's move on. Let's talk about some of our NFC East predictions, and then we'll move on to the rest of the NFC as well. Starting with the NFC East, you can see Drew and I actually started with a little bit of a disagreement as to who's going to win this, but he actually called me yesterday and said, hey man, I'm having some second thoughts. If there's any way, and of course there isn't, I'd have to fire our slide guy and hire somebody new to get them to work on all this. He says, is there any way I can switch Washington and the Cowboys? He sees Washington winning this division as well, same as I do here. I think for the simple fact that not only did they win the division last year, but they seem to be the team that to me has most improved and done the most to try to get more dynamic, especially bringing in wide receivers, which in today's game is one of the most important thing to do is to get weapons on the offense. They went out and did that in Washington. Their defense is now getting older, getting another year's worth of experience on that young defensive front should only help them rush the passer all the better. Their defense, they took Jamin Davis in the draft. They've buffed up the rest of this team through free agency on defense. Outside of tight end, and I know some people take Logan Thomas as a fantasy tight end. Outside of tight end, this looks like a complete team. The only question to me is what kind of Ryan Fitzpatrick are you going to get for 17 games? I mean, the guy has been historically volatile, I think is the right word. I mean, he'll have games where he'll throw 5 touchdowns, and then he'll have the next game where he throws 4 interceptions. So it's always going to be riding on his shoulders as to whether this team goes far in the league. And the reason I think that it will work out, the reason I think it will work as an experiment is the defense is going to be there to make up for the Fitzpatrick-style mistakes. When he's Fitz-tragic out there, you're going to have a defense that steps up to the plate and stops teams in their tracks. In my opinion, this might be one of the best defenses in the league to do that. So to have that kind of asset behind him, we've seen him be good in Miami. We've seen him be good in Tampa Bay in short spurts. Even if he's not that guy for 17 games, as long as he isn't a bottom 10 quarterback in the league, as long as he's close to average, this team is going to win games, especially in a weak division with the rest of these teams. Jonathan says, Philly is a playoff lock. Well, Drew was a little bit higher on them than I was. You can see I have them down at the bottom. I'll talk about them here in just a second. Ramey also goes on to say, if Zeke does not get off the start, they're going to throw in power. I think what he's trying to say is if Dallas isn't able to establish a run tonight, then they're going to lean on the passing attack. If that's the case, I almost think you got to come out guns blazing. You got to come out and try to catch this Bucs team sleeping early. I don't know if they start with Zeke and trying to pound the rock, but we'll see. Next, let's talk about the Cowboys. Obviously, they're playing tonight. The reason I see this team as hanging out somewhere close to the middle is just for the fact that they can't stop the run. I don't love their secondary situation right now. I don't think they're great in the secondary, but more than anything, they have great pass rushers in Randy Gregory and DeMarcus Lawrence. They have guys at linebacker who are going to be able to support the run, but that's going to be 3 and 4 yards down the field. I think the weakness of this Cowboys defense especially is still up the middle, something that they weren't able to address. They didn't go draft Christian Barmore. They didn't go out and try to add a big-name defensive tackle. They didn't even try to get, guys really to fill in the gaps. I mean, they could have taken Daquan Jones from the Titans and hoped that worked out, that he had another year's worth of solid run defense production out of him. They didn't do any of that. They went and targeted another linebacker with their first pick, and they're still going to let teams run for 5, 6, 7 yards a carry right up the gut on them week in and week out. So that just is not conducive to winning a lot of games in the NFL. I really see the Cowboys as one of those squads that is almost going to be shooting themselves in the foot several weeks. Like, it's going to be on Dak to put up 48 points to win a lot of these games. And week in, week out, it's just not a consistent thing. I know my Titans did it last year. I know I bring it back to my team a lot. It can happen, so I can see their ceiling being around 11 or 12 wins, but I just think there's going to be too many teams, especially in this division, that are committed to running the football, that are going to find ways to chew up clock and get the Dallas offense out of rhythm, and that's going to lead to close to a mid-range, somewhere around 500 record. Let's go to a few more of these comments here. Karen goes on to say, what about the Browns? We actually did just talk about the Browns in the last episode, and let me say, I probably would pick them to win the division now that everybody in the Ravens seems to get hurt. This is the third torn ACL they've had in the past week. From J.K. Dobbins, now Gus Edwards is hurt. They fear Marcus Peters is out with a torn ACL as well. The Ravens are looking like they can't stay healthy. So if that's the case, I think I'd switch my pick if I was able to go back and say the Browns are probably my favorite to win this division now. A couple more. Michael Smith goes on to say the NFC East is the worst division in football. I would actually argue the AFC South might be, especially with the injuries that Indianapolis has suffered. If those are long-term, like they could be, those could be 12-week injuries for Carson Wentz and Quentin Nelson, their guard. If Indy is not up to snuff and is playing with a backup quarterback, they're not going to be very good. Jacksonville has a new head coach. They have a rookie quarterback. Their roster isn't that good to begin with. And don't get me started on Houston, man. Houston is a train wreck waiting to happen. I can't wait to see if Tyrod can drag out more than 3 or 4 wins out of that football team. I don't think it's going to happen. I'd say the AFC South might be the worst division. Outside of the Titans, everybody has a lot of problems going on right now. And the Titans have their own question marks, like a lot of changeover on the defense, some coaching changes. They don't know who's going to play right tackle right now. That whole division is a walking question mark. So I would say NFC East is probably second worst if I had to just pick one. Ramey also says you can't trust that division. It's confusing every year. Yeah, I mean, the NFC East is 100% one of the hardest ones to call because forever these teams have been just kind of deadlocked somewhere around 7 and 8 wins. But I think this year we might see a little bit of difference. Washington's built up the offensive line. They've brought in a lot of guys to replace. I know Morgan Moses is gone, but I believe they brought in Charles Leno to take that spot, and they drafted Sam Cosmi in the second round. Both quality tackle prospects to play that other tackle position. They have, Antonio Gibson isn't a highlight name of a running back, but he's effective. He's efficient. He's not a bad player. They brought in Curtis Samuel to play wide receiver. They drafted Diami Brown. They brought in Adam Humphries, all to go with Terry McLaurin. If one of those guys is a second wide receiver, all of a sudden this wide receiving core looks a lot scarier, and then the defense is only getting better. Plus, you're getting Ron Rivera back. I think we underestimate how devastating it is to lose your coach for the amount of time that he wound up sitting out with while he was battling cancer. So if you get an entire season of your head coach being healthy and being with the team and working with everybody week in and week out, what kind of dividend is that going to play? They already won the division last year. In my opinion, they only got better. I think this might be the year we see a little bit of separation from some of these teams in the NFC East. Now, going back, we talked about the Cowboys really quick. Let me talk about a couple more of these comments, and then we'll move on. Cody, good to see you, man. He says, man, this looks like a lot of wins for a very bad division. Well, they have to play each other, number one. So there's already going to be some wins in there as well. That 9-8 record I had for the Cowboys, I will say this, is kind of banking on both Dak being healthy as well as that offensive line kind of holding up. That has been the major battle for the Cowboys in these past couple, this year, last year especially. It's just staying healthy and keeping everybody on the field. If they can produce that, I'll say 9 wins. It's really hard to predict. If they don't, I could see the floor for them being 5 or 6 wins as well. I mean, especially if something happens to Dak, but even if Dak plays and the offensive line goes down, this is probably a 6-win football team. So I'll give you that. There's a lot of variance here for this division, but I will say when it comes to wins and where you think they're going to finish, they got to play each other. That's 6 games right there for each one of these teams. Let's talk Giants. Why do I think the Giants are going to be better? Just like the Redskins, the Giants have spent this offseason putting weapons around Daniel Jones. Now, I would have loved to see them buff up their offensive line more than they did, but they have a lot of young players. You know, Nate Solder is also returning. He didn't play last year from COVID, I know. Woohoo, he hasn't been very good for them, but you know, it's still a veteran presence on this offensive line to go with a lot of young guys like Andrew Thomas and Will Hernandez on this offensive line. Realistically, though, when you're talking about the Giants, this team is going to sink or swim on the fact that Daniel Jones is going to be delivering the ball as quickly as possible before that offensive line falls apart to guys like Kenny Golladay. Darius Slayton is still there. Sterling Shepard is still there. They also spent a draft pick on Kadarius Toney out of Florida. So they have, again, like a lot of other teams, invested in their weapons in the offense, and that's what you want to see. You want to see teams spending on wide receivers and really buffing up your it doesn't matter the position. What you care about is it a weapon? You know, Saquon's a receiving threat. You now have a bunch of wide receivers. They have Evan Ingram. They signed Kyle Rudolph to play tight end. They have so many guys on this team that can be the best second and third option. If Golladay is a number one, they are going to have an effective passing attack, at least short to mid-range, if they deliver the ball quickly. The biggest weakness on this team is exactly what we just talked about, the offensive line. Now, I could see a scenario where we get to the end of the year and everyone's saying, oh, Daniel Jones isn't good enough, man. Look, they only won 6 or 7 games. I think we got to throw that style of thinking out. I think the best way you can look at this year is to say, what did Daniel Jones do with the time he was given? If this line steps up and they're somewhere around league average or maybe even better than that, and Daniel Jones is still making mistakes, sure, I'm all for the Giants drafting another quarterback and moving on. But if we're watching the kid get hit left, right, and center, have no time to throw, it doesn't matter how many receivers you have if you can't get your quarterback 3 seconds to throw the ball. I think that is going to be the Giants' limiting factor this season. It's that the offensive line is not going to be very good. On paper, it's one of the worst groups in football. I think the defense will be good. I think the receivers will be good. The question is going to be, can you give your quarterback enough time to cook with? I think the answer to that is simply no, which is why they're kind of held back at a 7-win spot. A couple more of these comments here. Will says, dude, seriously, the Washington Hornets, Rampage, Gorillas. He gave me 3 names for the Washington football team right away. Cody also says he feels bad for Saquon Barkley because he's going to get crushed every game. Yes. Yeah, I mean, that on top of the injury history he's already had, I mean, wasn't bringing in Dave Gettleman the idea that we were going to play defense and run the ball? But the offensive line has been bad for the Giants. It's been a problem year in and year out, and they've tried to fix things. But you get to this offseason, you trade the only good offensive lineman and productive offensive lineman you have in Kevin Zeitler away, and you do it for a song, you send him to the Ravens? I don't understand it. I'm trying to wrap my... usually you at least kind of see the intent. You may not agree with it with teams, but I look at this Giants team, and they're bringing back a guy like Nate Solder who's been bad, and they're like, oh, it's fixed now. And that's just not the case. I think that's why they're going to keep struggling. And fair or not, I think that's why Daniel Jones is going to be on an extremely hot seat when we get to the end of the season. We'll see. I hope he can overcome it. I've actually met the guy in person, so I hope he succeeds. I just don't think the Giants have done enough and put enough around him to make that happen. Matthew, he says, well, he has returned. He missed his football, and he missed his football talk. Man, we missed you, Matthew. That's all I can say. I'm glad to be back. We're glad everybody in here is back. It's the long off season is over. I know I'm excited to watch this game with you guys here coming up. Okay, I'm not reading the rest of those, Will. But he's just throwing a bunch of names out for Washington. Hopefully they at least pick a name before the year's over. Let's round it out. Let's talk about the Eagles really quick, because this is one of those teams that I find really, really interesting for the fact of, kind of like we talked about with the Cowboys, they could have a higher ceiling than people are thinking. I know a lot of people are predicting the Eagles to not be very good, and you can see I'm one of those people as well. I don't ultimately think they put it together. But I think we're kind of forgetting that they have a lot of veterans on this team too. They have a lot of offensive linemen that opted out last year that are returning, that should hopefully give Jalen Hurts a much better sort of scenario to work with in Philadelphia. Now, I'm not quite sold on the receiving situation. I like Dallas Goedert. I know they drafted Devontae Smith as well, and I love him, but I liked Jalen Reagor last year, and they found a way to not make Jalen Reagor successful. So I just don't know that I can say, oh, well, now they took Devontae Smith. It's fixed now, right? Like, Smith is obviously the better player and the better prospect out of college, but, you took a good receiver in my book last year, and it didn't work. And I don't mind them taking another one, but I just can't predict them to succeed in that sense just because they did it again. I think on top of that, you've got an aging defense. You lost, I think, most importantly, Jim Schwartz, the guy who's been calling the defense for the past few years for them, including their Super Bowl run. With him leaving, I think the defense is going to look different. There's going to be that kind of hangover you get when schemes change. I think this is one of those years that Philadelphia, even though they've still got some talent left on this roster, finds a way to not make it all work. And, if I want to point to another thing, trading for Gardner Minshew. Okay, I know you didn't give up a lot to do it, but what sort of vote of confidence does that send Jalen Hurts that you're trading for another former starting quarterback before the season starts? Like, I thought the whole point of not drafting a quarterback this year was we were going to give it to Jalen Hurts and say, this is your team, man. Then you get to training camp and you say, oh, well, we need to go trade desperately to go bring a guy like Gardner Minshew in? Like, how does that make sense? Again, usually with a lot of these GM moves, you can kind of say, I get what he's going for there. The only thing it tells me is they watched Jalen Hurts throughout the whole preseason and throughout training camp, and they said, this is not the guy. We don't believe in him at all. That's the only reason I would think you'd pull this move, because all you're doing is sabotaging his confidence. And don't get me wrong, I like Gardner Minshew. I think he's a better quarterback than what we got to see out of him in Jacksonville. And I'm happy that he's out of the division on top of that. But I look at it, I'm like, why would you do this if you're Philadelphia? Why? Like, the plan is, you're not going to start him, right? Like, if Jalen Hurts flames out and you play Gardner Minshew, you're not going to go into next year and not draft a quarterback. So where are we? Like, why even make this move? And that's just that kind of head-scratching move on top of firing your head coach last year in Doug Peterson because he disagreed with something with like minutia with the ownership. This guy just won you a Super Bowl, and you're firing him. Like, nothing. The Eagles just seem like they're ready to push the plunger down and blow everything up. And I know they're giving this chance, quote unquote, to Jalen Hurts, but man, it just doesn't feel like it, does it? It doesn't feel like an honest to God chance. It feels like they're like, well, we drafted him, we spent a second round pick on him, we might as well at least give him another year, but let's already plan for what happens when he fails. Like, that's no way to run a football team. You can't say like, oh, when he fails, we'll go do something else and start planning for that already. Like, I look at this Eagles team, and I'm going to read a couple of these comments here in a second because I know everybody's kind of itching to talk about the Eagles, but I look at this Eagles team, and I'm struggling to figure out how it all makes sense. I'm just struggling to put myself in the mind of the GM and the ownership and say, here's the vision that gets us to the playoffs. I just don't see it, even though they've got they've got veterans. They got guys like Brandon Graham that are coming to the end of their career, and it's just a shame that I think this is going to be one of those years that despite how well those guys play, I just don't see a lot of success on the horizon. Now, you can look over to the other side of the aisle there, and you can see Drew's a little bit higher on them than I am. I still think they got some questions to answer at wide receiver, but 7 wins isn't out of my realm of possibility. I think out of all these teams, though, in the NFC East, my ceiling for the Eagles is the lowest. Let's move on. We'll talk a couple comments here. Jonathan, I know you're an Eagles fan, man. I know that was probably like a stab in the back for you a little bit. It's always tough to hear somebody tell you your team's going to stink, but man, let me know in the comments, what are you most excited about as an Eagles fan going forward here? He says the Eagles are going to have at least 10 wins. I love the optimism. Let me say that. And if this was last year and I didn't see the way Washington had built up the rest of this football team and the Giants trying slowly and steadily getting better on defense, I would say, yeah, maybe. Like, maybe the ceiling was there for them to win 10 games in a weak NFC East. But I see teams like the Giants, I see teams like Washington trying to get better and doing a pretty good job of it, or at least moving in that direction. And then I see teams like the Cowboys and the Eagles kind of spinning their wheels a little bit. 10 just seems like a lot for me. I'd say if I had to put a ceiling on it, maybe they break 500. Maybe they get to 9. That would be the absolute tops for me. But realistically, I think 7's a win. And that's the scary thing. What happens when you win 7 games and you have like the 12th pick? And you're looking at it like, well, we have Jalen Hurts. Maybe we don't believe in him. We have Gardner Minshew. We're pretty sure he's not going to win us a Super Bowl. And we're now out of contention to draft a quarterback because last year there were 5 great quarterbacks in the draft. That's not going to be the case this year. There's not going to be 5 guys. Right now it looks like Spencer Rattler and everybody else. And Spencer Rattler is probably going to go in the top 3 just because that's what people do. Now, could we have a Joe Burrow emerge from this college football season where nobody saw him coming? Could it be a Zach Wilson where we get that guy that elevates his game and works his way into the top 5? Yeah. But if you win 7 or 8 games as the Eagles, you're not going to be in a position to draft those guys short of trading up. Now, I know they've added capital. I know that's the thing. But, I look at it like they're going to get their pick for Carson Wentz from the Colts. If he plays enough games, they might. I think it can be even was it a second or a first round pick? They might even level up to a first round pick. But even with all of that capital, you have to have a trade partner willing to move out of that. And usually there's going to be 2 or 3 teams that are up towards the top that are going to be looking for their next answer at quarterback, and I don't see them really making that happen. So we'll see. Again, don't love where the Eagles are at. I don't love the team-building process that they're kind of going for, and especially for a team that should be saying, man, our Super Bowl window is starting to close with a lot of our defensive veterans getting older. This should be the sellout year where you're saying, okay, what do we need to add to this team? Like, you could have traded for Julio Jones in the offseason. You could have brought in any number of guys through this kind of COVID offseason where the money hasn't been there to buff up this team, and instead, it just doesn't feel like they did that. Now, I know they had cap problems, so I don't want to harp on them too much for that, but it just feels like the Eagles are spinning their wheels and saying, man, we're going to be somewhere towards the middle, and there's not much we can do about that. Jonathan also was on to say there's no confidence in Flacco and that they needed a backup. Okay, I get that, but when you bring in a guy like Minshew's not, if you heard any of his comments, he says, what did he say? He said he hadn't taken a crap in weeks because number 2 is not an option for him. You don't trade for that guy. On a personal level, I want that guy to be my starter, right? You don't bring that guy in to be the backup because you know he's going to be problems if he's not the backup. So why do it? Like, are you just scrapping Jalen Hurts? Are you planning on week 6? Like, things haven't started the way you wanted to, and you're going to play the quarterback kind of musical chairs where you rotate him? Don't love the idea. I think that's one of the big kind of weaknesses we've seen out of the Eagles here. They just have to make a decision. Are you going with Jalen Hurts, or are we searching for a new quarterback? Like, pick one or the other and stick with it. And Ramey, you're absolutely right, man. It is impossible to get even to 500. When I say 500, what I'm kind of mean is like you're either 8-9 or you're 9-8, either side of it. I know it's impossible to be exactly 500 anymore, and I, for one, think that's a good thing. Also, Jonathan goes on to say the wide receivers in Philly are what he's most excited about. Watkins and Rager are going to blow the roof off. I hope we see a resurgence out of Jalen Rager. I don't know that I believe in Sammy Watkins if he couldn't get it done with the Chiefs. He had a couple good games where he shined there with them, and I think losing them does hurt the Chiefs a little bit. But, if you couldn't go and just dominate next to Tyreek Hill, I really don't see you going into that Eagles room and dominating unless Devontae Smith is that great out of the gate from day one. I don't know that Watkins is that great of an addition. And he says, what happened to their defensive line? They are the best. Look, yeah, I agree. The defensive line is still going to be good for the Eagles, but I think the secondary has been a problem and is going to continue to be a problem. I think they're pretty weak at the linebacker position, so it's not just about the defensive line in football because teams are going to be throwing these quick screens, these quick slants, and they're going to be getting the ball into space, and you're not going to have the playmakers to stop that. So, there have been teams with great defensive lines that just haven't succeeded on defense as well. So, I look at that. I say the Eagles' D-line is still a strength for them, but those guys are starting to get older. This, again, should be the year that you're selling out because all those guys are going to be, their window is closing. So why are we kind of playing this musical chairs and trading assets for a quarterback and kind of not doing like signing guys like Sammy Watkins? That doesn't get you to the Super Bowl. That's exactly what I would be doing. I would be selling out. We're either winning the Super Bowl or we're winning 3 games. I don't care. We're selling out. We're trying to make something happen, and we're going to figure out if Jalen Hurts is our quarterback. Instead, you're already bringing on guys to audition for his next spot. I don't get it. Cody goes on to say Washington seems to have found the kryptonite in this league with both lines. First, pressure quarterbacks to increase mistakes, and then do the opposite for your QBs. Yeah, Cody, we talk about it a lot, right? And this is one of my favorite quotes, and I think even though it is definitely a cliche, it holds true. You win in the trenches. Usually the team that does the dirty work and is winning on the defensive front, is winning on the offensive front, those are the teams that win a lot of football games. And if you look at it, running the football is kind of a caveat of that. You can hand the ball off to just about any running back if you're outside of Trent Richardson, who is, basically Stevie Wonder back there. But you can give it to any running back you want as long as the offensive line is generating enough space for him and he's going to go get 4, 5, 6 yards of carry. Do that over and over again, you win a lot of football games. Ooh, okay. we'll move on. We talked NFC East. Let's talk about our next division, which is the NFC North. And to me, this is the most polarized division maybe in the NFC. Maybe you could give the cake to the NFC South that we're going to talk about next, but I just don't see too many people out there not picking Green Bay to win it all. Now, I think Green Bay takes a bit of a step back. I know this Aaron Rodgers drama has kind of driven up the best in him, and we've seen him kind of perform at that all-star, all-pro level last year, MVP caliber, really, that we saw last year while he's been motivated. My question is going to be, can he replicate it as the team starts to lose some other pieces? Corey Linsley is not there anymore. They're going to have to try to replace him. They've got this younger offensive line that they're going to be trying to build, sort of on the fly here. I know Aaron Jones has returned. They've lost Jamal Williams as well. Now they don't have their backup, their kind of 1-2 punch that was the strength of their running game here. They do have A.J. Dillon. I liked him when they took him. He's kind of a Derrick Henry clone without the top-end speed, where he's a big guy with a pretty good stiff arm. He doesn't change direction very well. He doesn't accelerate very well, but once he gets going with a head of steam, he's going to be a hard guy to tackle. They've got other question marks about guys coming in. They still don't have a second wide receiver on top of it. You've got Devontae Adams, who, again, far and away the best receiver. They brought in Devin Funchess, which I know Green Bay doesn't spend money in free agency, but man, Devin Funchess is the best we could do, and now he's hurt. He's going to miss the entire year. You still have Adam Lazard, a guy that I think is definitely the number 2. I like him, but he only made it through like 3 or 4 games last year. I'm not really counting on him being there the entire year. They still have Robert Tonyan, who, again, serviceable tight end. Aaron Rodgers made him look pretty good last year. But I look at this team, and I say, what if something happens to Devontae Adams? What if he misses a couple weeks? What is this offense going to look like? Jamal Williams isn't there either to kind of give Aaron Jones that kind of slack and that guy that when it's not working for you, it can work for me kind of dichotomy at running back. With those two guys gone off the offense and them still not really spending any capital at wide receiver, I look at this team and I say, are they going to beat the Tampa Bays? Are they going to beat the Rams? Are they going to go play the NFC West like their schedule kind of demands? And how are they going to stack up against those teams that play defense and run the ball really well? And I still think Green Bay is going to the playoffs. I still think Green Bay is going to win this division and it's going to be relatively comfortable. But when they stack up against some of these other teams in the NFC West and the rest of the NFC that are committed to running the football, I think they're going to come up just a little bit short in some of these games. Last year they did pretty well in those sort of scenarios. I just don't see it this year. On top of that, I know they drafted Eric Stokes on defense to be that other corner. I think they might have reached on him a little bit. I wasn't as high on him as they were. I think a lot of people were kind of lower on Eric Stokes than he was. He's a fast corner, though, that can hopefully keep up with some of the speedsters in the NFL. I hope he works out for them. We'll see how it goes. Outside of Jair Alexander, if you can put a guy that's just okay on the other side, the defense should take steps forward. I still think they're just all right at stopping the run. That's still the way to attack the Packers. They have Zadarius Smith rushing the passer. Hopefully Preston Smith bounces back. This is a good team, right? I think we all look at the Packers and we can say this team is going to the playoffs. They're going to be difficult for anyone that gets there. I just don't see them going and running the gauntlet in the NFC West. Will says Detroit will not be the bottom. That belongs to Chicago. We'll talk about them in just a second, Will, but I disagree, as you can see on the screen. Will also says the Vikings will win the division. He's just saying. Bold talk. If they had a better offensive line, I'd say they'd challenge for it. But man, Kirk Cousins, well, let's get into it. Kirk Cousins, the ultimate thing you got to do with a guy that is that immobile is you have to protect him. Outside of the right tackle in O'Neal, the Vikings line is a ton of question marks, man. Now, they did draft Christian Darrisaw in the first round this year. I think that was a fantastic move. But when I look at Christian Darrisaw, even if he's great and you got O'Neal, the rest of the interior line is going to be a problem, and Kirk Cousins is not the guy who's going to roll out and kind of escape pressure. He's going to struggle. Now, you look at the strength of this team. What do they have? They've got 2 good wide receivers, and they have Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook, again, is still going to get yards. He's still going to be one of the most effective running backs in the game, but are you going to win a lot of games with the offensive line being as soft as it is for Dalvin Cook, or should that have been the focus this offseason? Personally, for me, I think they should have spent more on the offensive line. Now, I know they spent a first-round pick, but this should have been almost a Chargers-style rebuild where they're signing free agents, they're drafting guys, they're doing everything in their power to get this offensive line back up to snuff. If they did that, I'd say they'd challenge the Packers. They didn't really. I mean, they were kind of half and half. They were wishy-washy on it. I do like the Darrisaw pick, but outside of that, they haven't done enough for me to say that this team is going to take it to the next level. I think defensively they'll be solid. They've got some starters coming back from COVID as well. I know a lot of teams, I say that about a lot of teams, but the Vikings especially, I think, were one of those teams that were missing some of these starters. I think they're still a little weak in the secondary. I think even losing a guy like Xavier Rhodes, who looked washed his last year there in the Vikings, you look at what he does for the Colts, they still really haven't recovered from that. I know Jeff Gladney's on the team. This team still is looking like one of those squads that's hanging around somewhere around 500. Now, Will goes on to say he'd take a bet that the Vikings go first. What's the ceiling for the Vikings? Let's talk about that. I think this team's ceiling is probably somewhere close to 11 games, maybe 12. I think without an offensive line, you're going to go up against some of those tougher defenses in the NFC West, and they are going to make Kirk Cousins' life hell. He is going to be running for his life as best he can. He's going to have some of the big boys right through the middle come after him. Not to mention, you're counting on a rookie stopping some of the best defenses in the league right now and some of the best pass rushers in the league. Like Aaron Donald's going to be coming through the middle. You're going to be asking them to stop guys like J.J. Watt and Chandler Jones. We talk about Bosa out there for the 49ers. There is so much talent on the defensive fronts. We're not talking about the Seahawks. There's so much talent on those defensive fronts that are just going to get after Kirk Cousins. I think that's going to be the big issue for them, and that's the reason why I see them coming up a little bit shorter this year as opposed to other years. Now, if they were playing something like the NFC East, yeah, we could talk about it, because outside of the Eagles and maybe the Giants, well, no, I take it back. Even that division, you talk about their defensive fronts, they would probably cause a lot of havoc for a team that struggles with their offensive line. I think until you fix that, when you're the Vikings, until you have a Colts style, what the Cowboys line used to be, the Eagles when they won their Super Bowl, until you can get that kind of offensive line around Kirk Cousins, I mean, Super Bowl's out of the option. Even playoffs is going to be tough to get to until you can protect a guy that's one of the least mobile guys in football. Couple more here. Will says the pregame show is starting. I'll try to pick it up. I'm sorry, guys. I know I meant to start this a little bit earlier, but we had a little bit of tech stuff. We'll keep going here. Chicago, the reason they're not losing to the Lions is because they're the Lions, man. Look at the roster. I'm going to start by talking about Chicago, but I'm going to get to the Detroit Lions here in just a sec. Chicago, I would have rather seen the Cowboy or the same style devotion to the offensive line. Now, I know they drafted Tevin Jenkins. Love that pick as well. I think between those two guys, Darisaw and Jenkins, those are some of the best offensive linemen to come out of this outside of Penei Sewell, who went to the Lions. They've done a little bit, but letting go of Charles Leno for virtually no reason, and then the injury to Tevin Jenkins on top of it just leaves whoever's playing quarterback for the Bears at a massive disadvantage. You kind of suffer from that Kirk Cousins issue where those guys aren't scramblers. Andy Dalton isn't going to scramble. Nick Foles isn't really going to scramble. Justin Fields can scramble some. So the reason I think we're going to see Fields a little bit earlier than a lot of people think, I know they said Andy Dalton's a starter from week 1. I don't think Andy Dalton's going to make it to week 3 because this offensive line is going to be bad. He's not going to succeed, and then there's going to be fans clamoring for change. They're just going to pull the trigger and do it. The only reason I'd see them not doing that is because they don't feel like Justin Fields is ready. And I can kind of see it. He did some good things in the preseason, but he also had some sort of sketchy plays against some backups and everything. Not playing against starters would make me a little hesitant to start Justin Fields from the gate. I get why they're trying to hold off, but ultimately, neither of those other two quarterbacks are going to succeed when they're under the pressure that the Bears are going to give up. So they're going to have to move on to Justin Fields in the short term. Defense should still be good for Chicago. It's been good, and they haven't won a lot of games. I know they've got a couple guys coming back from COVID as well. I talk about most teams have that, but especially on the Bears, you felt like they weren't quite that same like top 2, top 3 defense when they were missing guys last year. I think they're going to get close to back to there, but when we talk about Chicago, it all lives and dies on what is the offense going to do, because this offense has just been like spinning its wheels for basically since Matt Nagy got there, and even before that. When Fox was the head coach, they have never been able to really get their offense going for the past few years, and I think that continues here. I know they got Darnell Mooney. Chicago fans are excited about him coming in to be number 2. Allen Robinson still returns, so they have some wide receivers. They still have Jimmy Graham as a tight end, so this isn't like a receiving core totally devoid of options. But it all comes down to the trenches. And, man, they are not going to win up front again. And when they fail, I think it's important as fans to just not say, oh, it's the quarterback's fault. No, it's the offensive line, and really it's the GM's fault in Ryan Pace for not addressing that more this offseason. Okay, now the Lions. What do the Lions have going for them? I don't want to harp on teams that we have low. Again, Drew and I together have them winning 5 games total. So when we talk about this team, what do they have going for them, man? they're rebuilding, and they know they're rebuilding. They dealt Stafford for Jared Goff entirely for the sake of saying this is a more than 1 year rebuild. We're going to take multiple first-round picks from the Rams, and we're just going to see what we can get out of Jared Goff this year. He is literally the bridge quarterback that doesn't have the rookie to replace him. Talking about the rest of this team, it gets a lot thinner. I mean, they're sort of buffing up the defensive line. They're working on getting better in the trenches. They drafted Penei Sewell to play on an offensive line that, it's actually pretty good. If you look at all the names pound for pound on this offensive line, that is the best unit on this team, hands down. And then we move to receiver. They just cut Brashad Perriman. They have Tyrell Williams as a number one receiver, a guy that, again, has been injured and skipped a year for COVID, and let's be honest, was kind of like a second to third receiver before that, and he's going to be their number one. Oh, man, I don't know why you don't keep Marvin Jones. I don't know why they shipped off a veteran like that for basically nothing outside of him saying, I'm going to be a problem in the locker room if you don't get rid of me. So they get rid of Marvin Jones. They let Kenny Golladay walk. They don't pay him. And you're kind of looking around, and it's like TJ Hawkinson's about the only guy who's going to catch the ball in this team. I look at that, and I'm like, man, is this team from the 70s? Is this team from the 60s? I know they're going to try to run, and they might even have a little bit of success with that, but the defense is going to be so bad that you're not going to be able to run when you're down 21, and it's the second quarter. So, yeah, I think outside, if not for the Houston Texans, I would say this is the worst team in football. I think they know that, and I think they are sort of building towards the future. Kind of like what I was saying about with the Eagles. You get where they're coming from. They know this isn't the overnight fix. You don't just slap a Band-Aid on this or make one smart move and it's all fixed. So instead, they're playing the long game. They're kind of blowing it up. They're going to run out Jared Goff's contract until he can be cut. They'll cut him, and then they'll draft a quarterback when they're not very good. I think the Lions are going to be one of the worst teams in football this year. I don't mean to say, brace yourself, Lions fans. That's all I can say, because I really just don't see a lot of bright spots in this team. Maybe Okuda's a little bit better. That's what I want to see. Maybe the defensive line is good. Maybe under Dan Campbell, maybe he kind of gets that physical mentality kind of working with everybody. Outside of that, it's looking rough out there in Detroit. That's all I can say. Just brace yourself, Lions fans. You're on that 2 to 3 year trajectory before you're ready to even think about playoffs again. GP goes on to say the Lions' wide receiving core are as good as Le'Veon Bell's rap career, and I agree with that. Will goes on to say, he says he'll bet the Lions aren't on the bottom, but man, it's just hard for me to say the Lions aren't going to be the worst team in this division, let alone the worst team in this conference. I can't look at another team and say that they're going to finish worse in the NFC than the Lions are, for the simple fact the Lions aren't going to be able to throw. It's 2021. You got to be able to throw a little bit, right? Like, the Jets couldn't throw last year. They won 2 games. So I just see a similar finish for the Lions coming up. He also, Will also says, Ed Sheeran on the pregame show. He's, okay, the NFL needs to get in touch with their fan base. I'm not going to read that last part, but I agree with it. Also, Will, let me say this. They do all that stuff to reach out to other fans. They're trying to bring in other people and give them some reason to watch. Now, I agree. I'm not really entertained by Ed Sheeran, but, I mean, who knows? Maybe there are people in here that are. They never admit it probably, but maybe there are people in here that are. NFC South. Is it any surprise who we think is going to win? I don't think so. I mean, this is the only time in NFL history a team has won the Super Bowl and brought back every starter. That's not a coincidence. I think people on this team are bought in to not only Tom Brady's mentality, but also Bruce Arians and everything that he has been preaching over the past couple of years since he's got there, which is just this culture of winning, this mentality of winning. I think he's been one of the better coaches, which, despite all of his other flaws, I think when you talk about Bruce Arians, he has this mindset that we do what it takes to win football games. We bring in the guys we need to bring in. We make the money work. And a lot of guys like Mike Evans, taking less money to keep the wide receiving core together, to keep Chris Godwin in town. When do we see that? Never. Like, almost always a team wins the Super Bowl and everybody says, oh, well, that was fun. Time to get paid. And they run off somewhere like Jacksonville, like Detroit, like any one of these teams that signed a big dollar contract that was picking somewhere around 10th in the draft. Like, that's just what happens. And it didn't happen in Tampa Bay. So I think it's going to be incredibly exciting. Drew obviously loves giving out those high numbers. He's a little bit more of an optimist than I am. He loves putting teams up around those 14, 15 wins. I think 12-5 is still an incredibly good record, especially for a team with a 44-year-old quarterback going into his, feels like 300th season in the NFL. But the biggest challenge for them, in my opinion, is going to be, what does Brady look like at the end of this season with now another grueling game at year 44? Can he kind of keep that sort of that youthful energy and what he needs to do to perform at a high enough level to win a Super Bowl again? Because when we're talking about it, like Big Ben kind of crapped out. Drew Brees crapped out. We've seen so many quarterbacks get to the end of that grueling 16-game, now 17-game season and just not have the arm strength, not have the physicality to get their team over the humps. The real question is going to be, does that happen to Brady here? And if it starts to look that way, do you sit him down? Is that why they drafted a guy like Kyle Trask in the second round, to be that spell quarterback that, hey, maybe we've won 11 or 12 games and we got 3 games to go. Do we play the rookie for a couple games and give Tom Brady a rest? Is that a scenario where you could see the Buccaneers kind of going with a 2-quarterback system in that regard? I don't know. But I will say this, sooner or later, Father of Time is going to catch up with Tom Brady. My question is it going to be this year? I mean, they have a good offensive line. They're able to run the ball. They have a good defense. They have everything you want to see to not put the pressure on a quarterback to be the only guy who can make it happen. And that's what you do when you win Super Bowls. Add a great quarterback on top of that like Tom Brady, they're going to be back in the playoffs. I think everybody knows that. Like, you look at the rest of our predictions for this division, we don't think they're going to be very good. Outside of maybe a surprise out of Carolina, maybe the Saints, like Jameis Winston's the 30-touchdown guy without the 30 picks, and we're talking about this team, getting back to, the Bucs are going to run it back. They're going to win this division. Let me read a couple comments because I know Will has something to say here, so let me switch back over. JP first says, "What? The Bucs at first? No way!" I can hear the sarcasm in that one. Will also says the Bucs will get 15 or 14 wins and repeat as Super Bowl champions. Is the Super Bowl hangover something that you're worried about? Are you worried this team isn't going to hit the ground running right out of the gate because just that you take that edge off a team where they win a Super Bowl and they're just not quite the same? Maybe. I don't know. I think there'll be a little bit of that, which is why I think 12 to 13 is a little more realistic. I could see the ceiling be around 14 or 15 games, but I just think Tom Brady more than likely probably not going to be 100% at every one of these games. I think they're going to sort of prioritize resting him for the playoffs over stepping him in and making him play that Week 16 game when you're already kind of clinched the division. I think the Bucs probably win 12 or 13, and because they don't have their foot on the pedal quite as hard as some of these other teams, I can see them finishing a little bit behind some of these other teams in the NFC. But still, we see them both Drew and I being the winner of this NFC South. Moving on here, let's talk about the Saints. I have them at 9-8. Drew has them at 9-8. This is a great roster with a quarterback question mark as large as anything else. I mean, we saw Jameis Winston take this Buccaneers team before they won the Super Bowl and win, 8 games? 9 games? Obviously, he had that 30 for 30 season where he threw 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. If he brings that kind of volatility to the Saints, I think it's going to be exactly the same. I think the Saints are a very good roster. Their defense is pretty solid. Their offensive line is really solid. Alvin Kamara is great. Their weapons are kind of bad, especially with Michael Thomas out. I don't really see a lot of options there outside of Marquez Callaway, who had a very good preseason. But you look at everybody else in that receiving room, and you're like, man, is it Traquan Smith? Is he the guy that steps up? I don't really think so. So they don't have the weapons they had in Tampa Bay when Jameis Winston threw 30 touchdowns. If that kind of regresses, and we're talking about Jameis Winston throwing 20 touchdowns and maybe 30 interceptions, this team is going to be bad. I believe in this defense. I believe they're going to be the thing that keeps this team sort of relevant and still able to kind of compete with some teams, and I see them getting close to 500, whether it's either side, 9 wins, 8 wins, whichever you like. I just really look at this Saints team, and I say, if they had a tougher division, this would probably be a 6 or 7 win team with the quarterback situation and the receivers the way they are. But it's not, and I see them winning more games in this division and getting close to that 500 mark. Now, moving on, let's talk about the Carolina Panthers. 7-10, the big question marks, kind of like the Saints. What do we get out of Sam Darnold? Is he the guy that saw ghosts for the Saints, or is this another case of the Tannehill syndrome where Adam Gase just absolutely ruined this guy's career and sabotaged his confidence? I mean, and Sam Darnold is going to be the massive question mark there in Carolina. What do we see out of him? Because he's got weapons. Unlike the Saints, he has Robbie Anderson. He has DJ Moore as well to throw to. They have guys that are going to be able to get open and to make plays down the field. He's played with Robbie Anderson as well, so there should be some chemistry with that. The real question to me is going to be when you look at this Carolina team, number one, does the offensive line protect him well enough to give him time to get the ball down the field? And number two, with all those picks that they spent on defense, trying to get this team sort of back to that run the ball, sort of play defense mentality that they had under Ron Rivera. If they're able to do that, can this team make the playoffs? I would say maybe as the 7th seed. Maybe as the last team to kind of eke their way into the playoffs, because I look at the rest of this NFC West, and we're going to talk about teams like the Vikings challenging. There might even be a second team on the NFC East. If this is the AFC, I'd say no way. But with the way everything else kind of looks, maybe they're an outside chance to make the playoffs. I look at the rest of the roster. I mean, they're not particularly great on defense. This isn't going to be a top 5 defense. It's not going to probably be a top 10 defense. It'll probably be somewhere in the between 10 and 20 in my opinion. You never know. There's always surprises, but I look on paper, they're not really that strong at that. Their offensive line is kind of a question mark. I know Christian McCaffrey is back, and that should help them out immensely when you talk about the number of touches that guy eats. But there's the injury question with him. Can he handle another 350 touch season where he's basically the only running back that you're interested in giving the ball to? Panthers have a lot of question marks, man. This is a question mark season for them, and realistically, if you have a couple of those things hit, like Sam Darnold's our quarterback going forward, okay, we just need to fix the offensive line. Or Sam Darnold's not the guy, but man, we figured out some things on defense, and we have Christian McCaffrey coming back. We know we can rely on him. If you have a couple of those things break your way, you can fix that, and next year we could be talking about this team being a great team going into 2022. All right, let me check comments really quick. Frank, good to see you, man. Michael, he said he thinks the Falcons will do better, like 8 or 9 wins. Or maybe he said 8 and 9. Let me talk about the Falcons here, because that's a great segue. And Michael, I appreciate you bringing that up. I could see them doing that for the simple fact that I know who the coaches are. I've got to watch the coaches work with the Titans and kind of bring up a subpar defense with Dean Pease. That's now the defensive coordinator for Atlanta. I've seen Arthur Smith kind of call a good game plan and make things happen with their with the Titans offense and everything for Ryan Tannehill. So there are pluses in the coaching sort of perspective that I say maybe they get to that level. But I look at this defense and I say, man, outside of Grady Jarrett and Deion Jones, I don't know that I like anyone on this defense. I mean, it's really, really skinny out there. I love Dean Pease, and I know he's been able to get kind of blood from stone with the Titans defense as well, when you look at what they look like without him. But it is such a huge ask for him right now, I think, in Atlanta, to be good this first year. I just don't see 8 being on the table. On top of that, they traded Julio Jones away when that was the strength of the team, right? Like, the Falcons can throw the ball, and that's been their strength for years, but right now, the Falcons throw the ball, and you're talking about they're not really going to have a running game. Their offensive line took a step back last year. Now, they have some young players. They're still committed to them. It's going to be a question to see if they can kind of keep going and keep progressing as an offensive line and as a unit. But last year, they weren't very good. You have Matt Ryan, who's now getting older. Do we start to see him kind of approach that career cliff that a lot of guys seem to get to when they get to their mid to late 30s? There are so many question marks that I look at this team and I'm like, it's so hard for me to predict them getting to somewhere around 7 or 8 wins, especially when you talk about how good teams like Tampa and the rest of the roster is for the Saints, and you talk about Carolina having, in my opinion, a roster that's much further along than the Falcons are. So I look at the Falcons and I say, there are a couple things that maybe break their way and maybe they're great. Like maybe Kyle Pitts is a 1,200-yard tight end, and they have Calvin Ridley who steps up, and now he's getting more targets, and Russell Gage is a great number 2. But I look at all of that, and I'm like, man, I still don't know. Like, I said Dallas was going to get to 500, and I love 3 weapons on that team, and I love their offensive line when they're healthy, and I love Zeke when he's running behind a good line and everything's kind of working, and I love their pass rushers. I look at Atlanta, and I'm like, well, they got a couple of the receivers. If Kyle Pitts pans out, they have 2 great weapons. 2.5 if you count Russell Gage. They don't really have the offensive line. They don't really have the running back. They don't really have the defense outside of Grady Jarrett and Deion Jones like we talked about. So I look at the Falcons and I'm like, man, 4 might be a little pessimistic. I'll give you that. Like maybe this team's a 6-win team with the way they're going to score some points by throwing the ball, but I don't know. I look at the rest of this roster and this just looks like a hard rebuild to me. And Michael's saying he's saying 8 wins. And man, I could see that as, to me, that's probably closer to a ceiling for them. Like maybe 8 or 9 if everything kind of breaks their way. Like maybe Dean Pease gets a bunch of guys in the defense and he's able to dial up some creative blitzes and they're somewhere around league average or maybe even better than that. Maybe they're somewhere around 10th. And maybe their passing game's so good. Like I don't see the running game being good there, but maybe. Arthur Smith is obviously committed to running the ball if you watch Derrick Henry at all last year. Maybe Mike Davis is that smashing kind of back that that gives them the success they need out of the running game, and they're able to light people up. I'd say 8's kind of the ceiling for me. All right, well, let's move on. We'll talk about our last division here because I know the game is about to start. Let's talk about the NFC West. And in my opinion, this is the best division in football. And I know you're going to look at these records and you're going to say, man, this is crazy. Like, they all play each other. Where are these losses coming from? And let me say, I think they're going to beat each other up, but I think this is going to be one of those things where everybody loses to each other once. Now, they play the NFC North. I see them really taking advantage of that division when you're talking about the bottom end. Like, I think Chicago is going to struggle against a lot of these teams. I think Detroit is going to struggle against a lot of these teams. I think the Vikings are going to, with that offensive line they have, is going to struggle against a lot of these teams. If you go up and down the board, outside of the Seahawks, they all have either good defenses or very good players on their defense. I think Seattle is kind of that one outlier of the division. But they also run the ball and control the clock. So you look at every one of these teams, they play smash mouth football. They can throw the ball. They have great wide receivers for the most part. Let's break them down. I don't want to cheat anybody. Let's talk about these teams individually. And we'll start at the top with the LA Rams. I'm with you, Michael. I absolutely agree. This is the best division in football. Talking about the Rams, the reason I see this team getting only better is for the simple fact that Jared Goff is gone. Now, I was kind of a defender of Jared Goff a couple of years ago. If you've been watching long enough, you might have remembered Drew was the guy saying, hey, let's throw this guy to the curb. And I said, well, the offensive line wasn't very good this year. Let's see what he has. By this point, I've kind of checked out. If they're upgrading to a guy like Matt Stafford in a creative offense like Sean McVay runs out there in LA, this team's offense should be able to put up a ton of points. Now, am I worried about the running back situation? Yes. I would prefer it much more than where they're at right now if Cam Akers was able to play. But I think them trading for Sony Michel is kind of that admission that we can bring in a second guy that kind of complements Darrell Henderson and his smashing kind of running ability, and we're going to be able to kind of run like a smash and dash split between these two running backs and make it work in the running game. You look at these receivers, almost doesn't seem to matter who it is. They're going to find a way to make success. You look at Marvin Jones when he went to Detroit. He was basically a no-name third wide receiver that Matt Ryan made look like a number one. If you take guys like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp that have already been good with Jared Goff and they get a little bit better with that quarterback upgrade, this offense is going to be dangerous. Add that to the fact that this was the number one defense last year, I think they're going to repeat as one of the teams to beat in the NFC West. Now, one of the big subtractions and one of the big issues with this team is they lost Staley, their defensive coordinator. That, I think, can't be understated, him leaving. But I look at the rest of this team. I mean, they have Jalen Ramsey. They have Aaron Donald. They have so much top-end talent that I think the defense will find a way to be somewhere in that top 10 range anyway. And I see them really just being the class of this division and even the NFC, as you'll see when we talk about the playoff picture. A couple more here. Michael says he thinks Drew bumped his head with the 49ers record. The only thing I'll say, and I kind of made this towards the beginning of the preseason for a lot of my records, and Drew did his a little bit later, but the only sort of caveat I'd say to that is if the 49ers don't really pick a starter at quarterback, I could see them kind of stumbling a little bit. If they try this like two quarterback, we're not really sure who the guy is. There's the old saying, if you have two quarterbacks, you have none. And I can kind of see that in the NFL. Like if they're playing too many cute games, as much as I like Kyle Shanahan and his offense and how creative it can be, if they try to get too cute by switching guys in and not really letting guys get into either one of those guys get into a rhythm, I could see them kind of stumbling a little bit. Frank also goes on to say the Rams have a hard time against the Bears, and he says they know Stafford. Yeah, you know Stafford when he's playing with that Detroit defensive line, Frank. Let me say this, defense in general. That's not going to be the case out there in LA, man. They're going to bring a good defense to that game as well. He's going to have better weapons, in my opinion, at least on par when you talk about Galladay and Marvin Jones, and now he's going to Cooper Kupp. He's going to have a much more creative offense. He's going to have a much better organization. They're going to be able to run the ball better. I know the Bears have they know who Stafford is, but man, talk about an upgrade. Is there a happier guy in the NFL than Matt Stafford leaving Detroit and the Lions and going on to a team like LA that runs a creative offense? I don't know. Maybe Gardner Minshew getting out of Jacksonville, but I digress. Okay, read all those comments. We'll move on here really quick. Let's talk Seahawks next. I have them 12-5 right behind the Rams. They're going to be dangerous. Russell Wilson throwing the ball. They have DK Metcalf. They have Tyler Lockett. Their offensive line, they've done a couple things to try to buff it up, even though it's not very good still. But it hasn't been, right? Their offensive line has been like bottom 5 for the past few years. Last year, they were like 22nd, I think, when it was all said and done. This year, if they're somewhere around that 22nd record, they're still going to be one of those teams that every week you see them come up on the schedule and you're like, man, this is going to be a tough game. And all of that is on Russell Wilson. I mean, they run the ball effectively. Chris Carson will be back. I still think they'll kind of do a little bit of committee stuff with guys like Rashad Penny. But as long as they have Russell Wilson and as long as he has a couple guys like Lockett and DK Metcalf to throw to, this team could win on any given Sunday. Now, the defense is kind of a question mark to me. The reason I could actually see this being the team kind of slipping in the NFC West is because I think, losing guys like Shaq Griffin, I just think this defense is already starting to erode a little bit. And the question to me is going to be, how well did they replace that this offseason? As long as they're average, if they can get to like 20th, they're going to win 12 games. The only way I see the Seahawks kind of imploding is if this defense finishes somewhere around like 27, 28, 29. Then I think they might be in a little bit of an issue. But for me, I look at it and it's like they've kind of been in this limbo on the defensive side since the Legion of Boom broke up, and they've still been a fringe playoff team to one that like always seems to get in and cause havoc when they get there. So I see the Seahawks winning 12 games. It's almost a business as usual thing for the Seahawks when you look at it. They didn't really get a lot better. But as long as you have Russell Wilson, how do you count this team out? Michael goes on to say the 49ers defense will be scary. 100% agree. Great caveat here to talk about him as well. And Frank says DK is a beast, and Michael agrees with that. I agree 100%. DK is a monster at wide receiver. If you look at it, the only time Russell Wilson has really struggled was like that year Doug Baldwin got old and hurt, and they only had like Tyler Lockett, and Tyler Lockett was fine, but he wasn't like he wasn't enough by himself to take over games. So now that they've got DK there, and you have Tyler Lockett still, like I said, it doesn't seem to matter who's playing tight end either. Russell Wilson finds a way to make them work. You remember how many tight ends they kind of hustled in and out of there, and they always seem to be effective? They just added Gerald Everett as well, so they're stealing from inside the division. When I look at it on paper, this offense is going to be fine, man. The real question to me for the Seahawks is going to simply be, can our defense keep up and just get somewhere close to average and let Russell Wilson, win these games 38 to 25 or 24. Couple more here really quick, and then we'll move on because I know the game is about to start, guys. I appreciate you all sticking with me. Let's talk about the 49ers here because I think the defense is going to be great. I think I'm right there with Michael saying this is going to be the bread and butter of this team. With an offense kind of in transition and in flux with the quarterback situation, we're not really sure what's going to happen. Who's going to be the starter week 8 versus week 1 versus week 16? The defense is the consistent part of this team that I think is going to be what keeps them from being a team like Chicago or a team like the Eagles, that they have some of those elements, but they had never seemed to put it together because of their quarterback situation and everything else. When you look at the 49ers, number one, they have a genius play caller in Kyle Shanahan. Number two, they've got weapons in Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk now. They have George Kittle returning from injury. I know, ripped my fantasy team. I would have won a Super Bowl if not for him going down last year. They have Raheem Mostert in that kind of just rotation of running backs that it almost doesn't seem to matter who's running the ball in this system. Their offense on pace, and they have an offensive line that's great too. Let me not discount them because I know a lot of people don't talk about offensive lines enough. But this 49ers offense just has so many different pieces that are already just fleshed out. So when you compare them to these other teams that have their question marks, they don't. I mean, you look at the 49ers. They've got their receivers. They've got their tight end. They've got their offensive line pretty much set. They have a running back situation that doesn't seem to matter, and Raheem Mostert seems to be a pretty good starter as well. On top of it, you look at the defense. The defense looks pretty solid. I am a little bit worried about the secondary. Sherman is gone. I think they just dealt Ahkello Witherspoon as well. Little worried about what that's going to look like, but still, they have the guys up front who are going to generate the pressure. So as long as you're okay on the back end, that always seems to work out, and it's why I always preach that same tried and true cliche, win in the trenches and good things happen. The 49ers look poised to win in the trenches again on both sides of the ball. To me, I'm willing to forgive a lot of the quarterback stuff. That it's still a scary thing, and it's still, I think, one thing that might see them get close to that record that Drew has them for, that you're rotating your quarterbacks a little bit too much, you're trying to be too cute, or you're trying to, you just can't commit to one guy and let him build up some rhythm and some rapport with the rest of the offense, and that can kind of cause problems. That is, to me, the biggest holdup. And the biggest thing I didn't like about the 49ers preseason was them trotting Lance in to just get him some reps and everything. I don't want to see that in the regular season. I think Trey Lance needs to take this year off entirely. I mean, let's talk about it. He only played like 300 snaps or something like that, or I think it was 300 passes. He only had like 300 passes in college, and he's now a pro. Like, give him this year as that learning year in the Shanahan system, and if you want to move on from Garoppolo after that, fine. Do what you got to do. But at the very least, either go with the kid, put him in there right away, or just let Garoppolo work until he gets hurt or until you get to the playoffs and we're talking about this team, maybe being one of those teams needing something to get over the edge. Right now, playing musical chairs with the quarterback almost never works. I don't want to see him do it. And I think that, to me, is the only thing outside of cornerback that kind of scares me about the 49ers. A couple more here. Frank says Jimmy G goes to New England. Not with them drafting Mac Jones. I think that ship has sailed a little bit, and I think there's still a little bit of that bad blood between him and Belichick and getting traded and Robert Kraft, and because that was supposed to be his spot, and they just couldn't commit to him over Tom Brady. So he got shipped out. I don't really see him going back to New England. You don't spend a first-round pick on a guy like Mac Jones if you think you can go and reclaim a guy like Jimmy G. Michael says the 49ers just have to stay healthy. That is also a massive part of it. I didn't talk about that as a weakness. Injury bit this team hard last year. We can't see a repeat of that, but it's a little understated because that's almost every team, but I agree. They need to avoid the injuries they had last year, otherwise the season could get derailed. Also on top of it, Frank says, what time is our show on nowadays? He just got back on days. We're planning on doing Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday morning before the games. We hope you guys can join us for all of that. As for times, it's going to be closer to about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. A lot of it just depends on Drew's work schedule. Again, he's changed jobs as well. The pandemic has really kind of stabbed the show a little bit in the back. So a lot of it will just depend on when we're able to get Drew in studio, because if you've been sitting here with me, I know you're tired. I know you love hearing me talk, but I'm sure you wish you had just a little bit of break where you could think about what I said and then get back when it's my turn and kind of turn your brains back on. But yeah, we're waiting for Drew for the most part to just kind of every day. It's going to be close to about 4 o'clock when we're on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Sunday it'll be 10:30 in the morning before the games start Central Time. It'll be 11:30 Eastern for everybody out there if you want to catch us live. Also, Michael goes back to the 49ers and says they're still a top 5 defense. I agree, man. I agree. But now Akello Witherspoon's gone. Remember, he stepped up big for them last year. Richard Sherman is gone. I know he was kind of starting to decline a little bit, and obviously he had all the offseason stuff we could talk about, but we won't. With those kind of changes at cornerback, there is still some susceptibility in the back end. I want to see how they look before I'm ready to commit to them being a top 5 defense again. But I love the defensive front. Obviously, their linebackers are great as well. Safety, I think they're really good too. So they have most of the pieces, but all it takes, if you look at Green Bay had a pretty good defense. All it takes is a guy like Kevin King playing that second cornerback spot, and everything can kind of fall apart. Okay. I'm going hoarse over here, but let's talk about my last team on the board, the Arizona Cardinals, losing out to the rest of the division by a tiebreaker. I look at this squad and I say, man, if I was selling out for a Super Bowl, what would I do? Bringing in veterans like A.J. Green and J.J. Watt on the cheap. I would try to draft young and athletic players like Simmons and then complement them with other linebackers as well, like Zaven Collins this year. I would focus on my offensive line. I would focus on bringing in as many weapons from my young and developing quarterback. Guess what the Cardinals have done all the way across the board? Exactly that. I mean, they brought in Malcolm Butler to play corner. I know he's contemplating retirement. I know he might not even play this year. But if you look at this decision in the offseason, you'd be like, man, he just had a top 5 corner performance out there in Tennessee. And we're bringing him in on what the relative cheap to come in and play cornerback for us. They've done everything amazingly through this offseason. And it just seems like it's starting to fall apart already when you're talking about Butler starting to retire and everything else. So I look at the Cardinals. Obviously, Kyler Murray seems like he's on the ascend. He seems like he's getting better in the league. He's getting more comfortable. You talk about their offensive line kind of getting better as well. They've improved every year since Murray has gotten there. That's going to be important that they take another step forward. The defense is looking a lot better, bringing in a guy to play across from Chandler Jones for the first time since he got to Arizona. This team is going to be dangerous. I said that about every one of these teams, but man, this division is just a nightmare. And I could see one of these teams falling off and just not having a lot of success against some of these other people in the division. But if they're able to battle each other and they're able to kind of split some of these picks, there's no reason I don't think we see the first time in NFL history we send 3 teams, or well, it would really be all 4 teams, but 3 wild cards to the playoffs from the same division. It's going to be tough. I know every one of these teams basically has to split with each other and then dominate the rest of the competition in the NFL. But man, I look at this team, I look at this division, and it's just so hard to pick because there's so many good things going on out there in the West. And then I look at teams spinning their wheels, kind of like Chicago, kind of like Detroit. You look at the East, and I mean, you've got a lot of question marks out there. The South seems like it's not as good as it was. Everything seems to be lining up for this division to dominate. Outside of an injury to a quarterback or something like that, I really see all four of these teams stepping up to the plate and looking really good. Now, what about the Cardinals? Is there something that could derail them? Obviously, Kyler Murray is still a bit of a question mark. I know he's getting better. I think Cliff Kingsbury's a big question mark for them as well because last year, when like through the first 6 weeks, they were running 5 wide like crazy. Like they ran 5 wide the first 5 or 6 weeks, as many plays as the rest of the NFL combined. And then they looked together and they looked at it and they're like, man, this isn't working. And they switched it up. So I think Kingsbury and his scheme hasn't really translated as well as they thought it would when you got the guy from college and you said, oh, well, he coached up Patrick Mahomes and he worked with Baker Mayfield. We're getting that quarterback guru who's going to take our quarterback to the next level. That might be the case, but the offensive scheme has not been transcendent like a McVay or a Shanahan. So I think the big question mark for them is going to be, what does this offense look like under Kingsbury this year? Has he been able to adapt? Has he been able to kind of change the way things look and the way things feel to not only put his signature stamp on it, but also make an effective offense that isn't quite so vanilla? And I think that was sort of the big slowdown with the Cardinals last year. Now, going to Frank's comment here, they have weapons. Yes, A.J. Green. Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins. They have Andy Isabella. They have Christian Kirk. They have 4 guys that I believe are very quality wide receivers. A lot of that is still a little up in the air. You want to see Kirk kind of take a step forward. He had a good year last year, but not quite that number 2, kind of close to that 1,000 yards that you want to see. Andy Isabella hasn't really been used as much as I thought he would be when they drafted him. You know, I love the guy coming out of college, but he's kind of disappointed a little bit when it comes to production. And then A.J. Green, towards their last year there in Cincinnati, he looked like he was slowing down a lot. What does he have left? So on paper, they've got a lot of great weapons. My question is going to be, can you kind of get the best out of those guys? Can everybody rise to the occasion and have it not just be Nuke Hopkins on the outside making everything happen and everybody else just kind of on the team? A couple more. Cody says this is the team that he says is 1 year away. That's how I felt last year. Remember, they had that kind of slide at the end where they missed the playoffs. Before that, they were challenging just about everybody they played. I know there was kind of 500 football, but like every game was close with the Cardinals, and then they just had like a last kind of slide off at the end of the year where they lost, I think it was 3 straight to let the Bears take the playoffs instead of them. I look at Arizona, and man, it's like this squad, they were 1 year away last year. I think this is the year. So I don't hate your opinion, man. I could, another year, if they have an offseason like this one, I would say absolutely they're going to be there, but I look at them and I'm like, I feel like that's where we were, and that's where we are now, is they were 1 year away, and now they're back. JP goes on to say, Arizona is too high. They're a retirement home with a head coach that isn't good enough. 7 to 9 wins for him. They will start fine and then fade. Well, hopefully they don't start too fine against my team because we play them week 1. But that is going to be also a question. They have a lot of veterans on defense. They have a lot of veterans at wide receiver. They have like a guy like A.J. Green. How much gas is in the tank? I talked about it with Brady a lot. I talked about it with some of the other quarterbacks like Roethlisberger. But I think the Cardinals kind of have that a little bit around the corner. Like if they get Butler back, does he have enough at 31 to be a top corner that they're going to need him to be? So they have question marks, and that's why I have them at the bottom here. Because I think compared to the rest of these teams, like I got a pretty good feeling about the 49ers that if they don't try to play the quarterback carousel too much, they're going to be good. I know Seattle is going to be good. Like they just always are. They're Mr. Consistent out there in the West. And then you look at the Rams and you're like, man, I just don't really see them falling apart, especially if Stafford's the upgrade over Goff that we think he could be. The Cardinals are definitely the biggest question mark out of the group, and that's why I have them at the bottom. But man, I look at all the good things they have going for them, and I got to say, this squad, especially playing in the NFC that's looking like it's a lot weaker than the AFC, should be fine and should win a lot of these games, especially out of conference. Cody says COVID has killed the mood in CenturyLink or whatever it is called now. Gives all these other teams a chance to come into Seattle and win. Yeah, I mean, COVID is massive, especially, we don't talk politics too much, but especially when you're talking about a liberal area out in Seattle that takes COVID maybe more seriously or more drastically than places like Florida and Texas. I absolutely agree. The 12th man is not what it was just because of COVID. So we'll see how much of that they get to turn around. I know the NFL is pushing to get full stadiums this year, and I expect they will. The question is going to be when the weather gets cold and maybe COVID kind of bounces back a little bit, what is it going to look like, especially up there in the Northwest? I mean, it's definitely a challenge the Seahawks are looking at facing that some other teams, especially in the Bible Belt, probably aren't looking at. A couple more. Frank says, still 30 minutes till game time. He lives in Tampa Bay. I don't know. I got 30 minutes worth of talking left, Frank, but I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you guys sticking around through all of this. You guys have been great. Let's talk playoff picture. We went through all the NFC, and this is where it's brought us. Let's talk about where we see these teams finishing. I see the Rams winning this conference. And the reason I kind of put them just a step above a team like Tampa Bay, even though Tampa Bay came in second place in their division last year, I think people forget about that. But the reason I see them finishing second behind the Rams this year comes down to, number one, Brady's age, and is he going to be consistent through that extra week of football that now you're putting on a 44-year-old's workload? Don't love that. And on two, as the second spot, I think the Rams are going to come out just a little bit hungrier, having not been in the Super Bowl, than a team like Tampa that just won it all. I think the Super Bowl hangover is real. I think there's going to be just a couple weeks that they're going to go in and they're going to play some teams. They're going to say, man, it's Carolina, or it's, we're playing somebody that we should be beating. Like maybe it's Indianapolis. We should beat them. And then they wind up slipping up a little bit because they think they've got it. Now, Brady has historically been amazing at keeping his teams motivated and keeping them focused. But it's still, to me, one of those things that if you look at it, he would win one and then lose one and then win one and then lose one. It's so hard to go back-to-back. I think the Tampa Bay maybe takes like that half step back when we talk about playoff picture, and they lose out to the Rams by one game here. Now, big surprise, I know on my list, Drew doesn't even have him making the playoffs, or he would if they had, he'd have him that 4 spot over the Cowboys if I'd been able to change a slide. But the big surprise for me is Washington. Again, I think that division is going to be easier than some. I think that team has improved more than a lot of people think. And I look at Washington and I'm like, man, they're going to be the surprise team of the NFC this year. So a little bit of a homer pick for me, or a little bit of a, kind of off-the-cuff pick for me. I know a lot of people aren't quite that high on Washington, but I think Washington is going to be the surprise team out of the NFC this year that gets it done. And then number 4, I have Green Bay, that I think, again, the top-end talent is there, but I think depth-wise, they're going to kind of struggle a little bit more than some of these other teams that win their division. I think you talk about how deep the former Redskins, the Washington football team are. You look at how deep Tampa Bay is. You look at how deep even the Rams are outside of everywhere but running back. And I think Green Bay just stacks up a little bit shorter. I think them having to play the NFC West, and the entire NFC West kind of works against them and the way their team is built as well. I just don't think Green Bay is built to stop those defense-heavy, run-heavy football teams out there in the West. And I see that's why I see them finishing 4th out of the group here. Couple more. Appreciate you guys sticking with me again. At number 5, I have the Seahawks finishing in the 2nd spot. Number 6, the 49ers, and number 7, the Cardinals. Again, I'm predicting it now. I think this is the first time in NFL history we have 3 teams come out of the West and win, or any division, and make it to the playoffs. And it's for the simple fact that I think the NFC is as weak as it was. If there were a couple more teams that were stronger, like if I felt better about the Vikings, or I felt better about the Bears, or I felt better about, the Cowboys, or I felt better about the Eagles, I would say probably you're just not going to have that kind of split, because teams are going to beat each other up in the division, and somebody's going to get the short end of the stick. But even if that happens, man, I look at the rest of the NFC, and I'm like, I would take the Cardinals over most of the NFC. I would say on paper they're probably the 7th or 8th best team out there. So regardless of them having to play such a tough division in the NFC West, they're still going, in my opinion, to mop up the rest of the NFC and get that last spot. Whew. All right, that was a lot of talking. This is a lot easier when you have someone else here with you. Guys, thank you so much. That's the wrong button. Thank you so much for sticking with me. It's been a blast covering all of this with you. Again, Drew and I, as well as a new face, Dwayne, will be back on Sunday to talk about all of these games in their entirety before they start. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to read 1 or 2 more comments here before we get out of here. Thank you guys so much. Again, we're going to be live Tuesdays, potentially Thursdays, and Sundays, all around 4 on the weekdays and 10:30 in the morning. So if you want to catch us, make sure you hit subscribe, make sure you hit like. Appreciate all that. Cody, as we head out of here, it says Tampa is the team he's least worried about having home field advantage out of the whole NFL. They would like to be that team with a chip on their shoulder, unfortunately. Home home field advantage or chip on the shoulder, which would you rather face Tampa Bay with? I think I would rather face them at my home and have them come in with a little bit of a chip from missing that number one spot. Number two, them just missing a bye is massive. Imagine being that team in the 3 spot that gets Tampa Bay having come off of a tough game in that first round, having to come, well, if they're second, then obviously you'd go to them. But still, I talk about Tampa Bay and I look at where they're at. I would just rather play them at my home, to be honest, especially if you can get them to play an extra game. Like if I'm the Rams and we see each other in the NFC Championship and they've had to play another game with a 44-year-old quarterback, that number one spot is massive for Tampa Bay. Getting that bye for Tom Brady, I think, will be huge for them repeating as champs. If it's going to happen, I think they're going to need to get that extra bye for their old quarterback. All right, that does it for final thoughts, guys. I'm about spent. I'm ready to go downstairs and watch some football. I know you are too. Thank you so much for watching with me. Again, I am Jake with Sports Around the Bar. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you again Sunday morning at 10:30 before the games start. Have a good week, and we will see you then, guys.